Welcome back. Former President Trump and some of his allies intensified their rhetoric over the weekend. At a Trump rally in Michigan, Georgia Congresswoman Marjorie Taylor Greene made some extremely incendiary and false remarks that, quote, Democrats want Republicans dead and they have already started the killing. Mr. Trump later told the crowd that Democrats were, quote, cruel and vindictive left-wing tyrants and accused them of wanting to burn every American institution to the ground. Now, that all came a day after Mr. Trump sent out a message on social media saying that Senate Minority Leader Mitch McConnell had a, quote, death wish for his conduct in the Senate and added a racist remark about McConnell's wife, Elaine Chao. She served as Trump's transportation secretary. This violent rhetoric comes at a time when dozens are on trial for the January 6th attack on the Capitol, and as lawmakers are sounding the alarm about threats they're receiving. In fact, Maine Republican Senator Susan Collins says she recently had a window at her home smashed and told the New York Times that she wouldn't be surprised if a senator or House member were killed, saying that what started with abusive phone calls is now translating into active threats of violence and real violence. Joining me now, my great Monday panel, president of Voto Latino and an NBC News contributor, Maria Teresa Kumar, former RNC communications director and Republican strategist, Doug Heye, and co-founder of Punchbowl News and an NBC News political contributor, Jake Sherman. Thanks to all of you for being here. So, Jake, let's start with this rhetoric that we heard from former President Trump over the weekend. Marjorie Taylor Greene, how concerned are Republicans, because they're now being asked about this rhetoric, where they stand on this rhetoric?
Define concerned, right? They're not denouncing it, or the ones that do are just very silent and few in number. There's really no incentive for them to say anything against Donald Trump, political incentive, because he's the leader of the party. But what you just quoted is really important, because people don't realize, many people don't realize, members of Congress are not walking around with armed security guards. These are people who live in their communities, who typically are without security details, while members of the leadership have security details. So it's quite scary for rank and file members of Congress to be out there in their communities with the kind of rhetoric that's going on in this country with elected officials. It's frightening.
Yeah, I want to play a little bit of what Rick Scott said over the weekend. He was pressed on this, and I think his response is quite interesting. Take a look.
Senator, the language is what I'm talking about. Isn't that dangerous?
I think we all have to figure out, how do we start bringing people together?
And you would agree that that language doesn't bring people together?
I believe that what the President Trump was talking about is the fact that we can't keep spending money.
That's not what the former president said. And Coco Chow was the phrase he used to refer to a former cabinet secretary, Elaine Chao.
I can try my best to bring people together, and I'm going to try to bring people together.
Okay, but I know, Senator, you know that Democrats have not already started the killings of Republicans, as Marjorie Taylor Greene has said.
I didn't see what she said, but it's also not helpful what the vice president says when she thinks that FEMA is going to treat people differently based on their skin color.
So he tried to redirect to recent comments by the vice president that have come under some scrutiny, but it was noted that that was taken out of context. But Doug, talk about the fact that Rick Scott didn't respond and just what that says about the position this is putting Republicans in.
Yeah, you know, last week when Karine was giving her briefing, she was asked a lot about Joe Biden recognizing Jackie Walorski, and everybody pretty much said, you know, this isn't hard. Here's how you do this. For Senator Scott and others, this shouldn't be hard. Here's what you do. You criticize it, then you move on. And you criticize it strongly because you know that this is going to come again. And the reality is, you know, with what Senator Collins has said, it's not that she's going to be right. She's already right. Steve Scalise was shot. Gabby Giffords was shot. So we're not talking about something that could happen in theory. We're talking about things that have already happened. And Trump is the #1 driver spurring this angry rhetoric on.
Maria, weigh in on this and the fact that, as Doug points out, members of Congress have already been hurt.
Well, and this is an escalation. And what we do know is that Trump's words do have consequences. This was not direct, his words were not directed necessarily to an elected member of Congress, but the El Paso shooting was because of the rhetoric against immigrants and Mexicans, and we saw that on the ground. And unless we actually have Rick Scott channeling John McCain. I remember when John McCain was on the road and someone tried to go after Obama saying that he was Muslim, he denounced it. He said, this is not who we are. This is not our politics. And that's what they need to channel, the Republicans, is channel this patriotism. It's not about party, but it is about national values. One of the biggest challenges I see right now, Kristen, is the fact that we aren't having a conversation that our democracy is at stake. And these types of rhetorics, it's an intimidation model that you often see in banana republics. It's a way to intimidate good people from being public servants. The fact that we have someone like Governor Whitmore, who had a kidnapping attempt without any consequences, is laying out the ground for someone to do something that is much more dangerous.
Let's talk about the other thread that we have been following with just 5 weeks until the midterms, which is this new polling from NBC News and Telemundo, which shows that Democrats are losing support among Latino voters. They're still leading overall, but losing support, and real concern, according to reporting from our Natasha Korecki, which we just talked about, that they could stay home. Not necessarily vote Republican, but some of these voters might stay at home. Maria,
that's the whole kit and caboodle, so to speak. As of 3 weeks ago, 51% of registered Latino voters had not received any message from either party, 51%. And if you see who was able to bring the Democrats over the top in the Senate, the White House, and the House, it was the Latino votes, not just in Arizona and not just in Nevada, but in Wisconsin and Pennsylvania and even Georgia. And one of the things that we found at Vote Latino is that we actually did an analysis and found that when you serve up a message in the Latino community connecting that their vote worked, that they actually got money in their pockets as a result of the Biden agenda, we saw a 14% increase in participation that they would vote Democrat.
Doug, weigh in here. And if you were advising some of these Republican candidates, if you were advising the candidates in Nevada, for example, what would you say they need to do to win over these disaffected Latino voters?
Well, what I'd say is probably not what they would do. Let's stop talking about sending people to other states and the things like that. And this is the challenge that Republicans face, and it goes to the issue of the rhetoric as well, is what they may want to say to a general election audience, they can't say because they're still communicating to their base. You know, we no longer have the politics of you run to the right in the primary and then you run to the middle in the general. Those politics don't exist anymore. So Republicans are locked in the position quite often, even if they scrub their website on some things. They're locked into a lot of these positions because of Trump and the base.
Jake, your take on this, how significant do you think of an impact this could be in states like Nevada, where, by the way, we're seeing some ticket-splitting voters in some of these states as well? People who are going to vote for different candidates for governor, or different parties, I should say, for governor versus senator.
I think that the thing that we're missing is that even a slight uptick or a slight closing the gap is pretty good for Republicans in many districts across the country, right? Because in close races, if you're closing that gap a little bit, that could help put a candidate over the edge. It's not very complicated. And this is something, by the way, Republicans have worked on for many years, and they've worked on it in states like Texas as well. You mentioned Nevada, you mentioned Arizona. So I think that's a huge deal for Republicans as they go into the next 35 days.
What does it say about our politics right now that we're seeing this play out in these key states, Georgia, Pennsylvania, to name a few more, Maria, that you might have someone vote for a Shapiro, but then potentially vote for a Dr. Oz?
Right. And I think part of it is because it's not getting the Democrats are having a really tough time getting their message out. And they have so many good things to run on. But when it comes to the Latino vote, let's say in Arizona, Nevada, even Texas, the moment that you put MAGA Republican in front of that, that's when you see people sitting out. They don't actually start flipping that seat. And it's to the benefit of both parties to create this level of identifying moderate candidates, because that's actually what's going to turn people out. But the MAGA Republicans what keeps people either from staying home or riling them up on the other side.
And there's one state we haven't talked about, and that's North Carolina, my home state. The last two polls in the Senate race showed it at 1 point. There's going to be a poll that comes out in about an hour that also shows it at 1 point. So if you're talking about a small subset of voters mattering, that's the state more than any other, with all the cartoon characters that we like to talk about, where you have kind of more normal, traditional candidates running, where it could have a real impact.
That's a great point. Let's talk about another trend that we're seeing that's just fascinating, which is that we're not really hearing Republican candidates talking about repealing Obamacare. For the first time in a long time, Doug, what's going on?
Well, one of the things that Republicans warned about is, or at least privately had conversations with, we'd often talk with Jake about it, is when you bring up a new entitlement, it's really hard to repeal it in any way. So we'd have repeal votes, but they wouldn't do a whole lot. Sometimes we'd have minor things signed. But ultimately, voters became accustomed to it. Voters like it. And what we heard overwhelmingly from 2010 to 2022 is people didn't want their health care messed with, however they defined it. So once you mess with it, you can't mess with it again.
And also the problem is Republicans never had the ability to replace it with anything. They didn't know what they would replace it with. So they'd be tearing it away and saying, well,
goodbye.
But for years, they said they would come up with something.
Yes, they
Right,
did,
but the
and they
best
failed.
example, I think the best example right now is all these Republicans, applauding the fact that now people's insulin is at $35. They didn't vote for it, but they are claiming it, and they recognize that that is actually a winning issue.
And when we were trying to repeal, we had our kind of more rank-and-file workhorse members, a Dave Camp, a Paul Ryan, so not your bomb throwers who are doing this, John Klein.
People who are steeped in the policy of this and really trying to get a workaround. Yeah, all right. Well, we will have to end it there. Thank you.
Thanks for watching our YouTube channel. Follow today's top stories and breaking news by downloading the NBC News app.